Going live on Instagram. Cool. Live on Facebook. Cool. Hey, I'm Olajide Paris of MakeCinematicMusic.com. In today's live stream, I'm going to talk about what equipment you need to be a resource that is absolutely a perfect companion for this live stream, which is my free composer's gear guide, which you can get at MakeCinematicMusic.com. There, I'm going to go in a lot more detail about a lot of the different pieces of gear that I'm going to talk about today. So, what gear do you need to compose music for film and games? Let's start with the very basic, completely non negotiable computer. So, you need a computer, whether it's Mac or PC, does not matter. It should run Mac OS or Windows, some form of Windows, Windows 10 or Windows 11, not Linux. Linux is great for some things, it's not the ideal operating system for composing film and games music. What are the specs of your computer? Well, again, take a look at my guide. I give complete specs for different Windows computers, along with parts lists from Part Picker and some Mac setups. But in general, what you need is at least 32 gigabytes of memory. That's going to be necessary for handling heavy sample libraries, and in some cases, 32 gigabytes will get maxed out very, very quickly. If you want more information about why I recommend 32 or more, you can check my earlier live stream where I talk about computers for composers themselves. Definitely an SSD boot drive, NVMe, if possible. That's going to give you the fastest load times with your operating system and getting projects open. And then you're going to need some form of external drives or secondary drives, whether those be internal if you've got a desktop or external if you are on a laptop. You're going to need at least a drive for your project files, and you're going to need a drive for your sample libraries. On my current system, everything is SSD except for I have a mass storage device where I back things up or where I put older sessions, but my sample libraries are all SSD. I've got 8 or 10 terabytes of SSDs for samples, and then I've got another 4 terabytes for project files and things like that. But that's what you need as far as computers. The next thing that you need, and this is where I and somebody else whose advice you'll find differ greatly, but the next thing you need is not a microphone, but you need sample libraries. If you're going to make music for film and games, you're going to need a bare minimum palette of sounds that you can go to get the sounds that you need. Some caveats might be if you happen to be a multi instrumentalist and you have access to lots of instruments and you don't mind playing them and you play them at a super high level, then you can maybe go this and you can maybe exchange this component with, instead of going for lots of sample libraries, you can go for a microphone or something like that, or an interface with a direct input that will allow you to record your instrument a path as a film or game. You're going to want to get some sample libraries. So, what are the types of sample libraries that you want? Virtual instrument. In my gear guide, in my free composer gear guide, I go over different that fits in your budget, and they go basically from around $500 or less to all the way up to $200 or $2,000 or more. And what you're going to be looking for when I say a symphonic orchestra virtual instrument is something that includes strings, brass, woodwinds, and percussion. That's the bare minimum. You need to have all of those things. Once you have a symphonic orchestra virtual instrument, you're going to also need some pianos. Actually, the pianos probably come first, but you probably already have some pianos. And if not, I can get you some links to some free stuff. If I'll do another video or I'll do a resource just on free pianos or pianos. But you're definitely going to need some pianos. You will also need some pop and band instruments. So everything from guitars, basses, and drums, all that kind of stuff, things that are more pop based. A really great. Now I'm not going to go too much into brands because I talk about that in my guide, but something like Native Instruments Complete, one of the various iterations of that, the Factory library, or even Sign Factory, which is free and amazing, by the way. Yes, I make content for Sign Factory, but it really is good, and it's only going to get better moving forward. Those are really great sources of these more kind of band-based things, especially pianos and drums and things like that. The next thing on your list in terms of sample library should be synthesizers. So you're going to need some form of synthesizers. The amount of synthesizers that you need and the variety that you need is going to depend on the styles of music that you're most comfortable with and that you're going to be pursuing the most when you start. There's two paths you can take to synths. You can either get software synths, which are purely algorithmic and based just on pure math. That would be things like Diva or Zebra, or you can go for something sample based, and that would be anything that runs in Kontakt, or better yet, something that runs in UVI's Falcon, like World Suite. Sorry, like Vintage Vault 3, which is an incredible product. The next type of sample library in the last category, or last two categories, would be the additional stuff. So you've got your orchestra, you've got your piano, you've got your pop and band instruments, you've got some synthesizers. The next thing you're going to want is probably either choir. Now, I have a personal position on choirs. I don't really use choirs in my music because I'm not convinced of the context that they add to modern music most of the time. Um, that's something for another subject for another day in terms of virtual choirs. But there are a lot of styles of music for film and games that require um, a really high quality choir. And if you are going to be writing that kind of music, you need to get one. I'll do another guide on choirs at some point, but choirs by George Strezov or Spitfire Audio are great among others. In terms of world instruments, that's something I'm an expert in. I've produced lots of sample libraries featuring world instruments. Some of them include the Origin series by Zonuscore, of which I've created several collections, and then UVI's World Suite 2, which I worked on for a very long time. And they worked on it before I did too. That's an excellent collection. I would say World Suite 2 is probably the be all end all in terms of world instrument libraries. And then there's great stuff by Orchestral Tools. In fact, at the day of filming this live stream, they just released their South American India, which by Richard Harvey, which I think is going to be really great. So the next thing, you've got your sample libraries, you've got your computer, not in that order. You're going to need a MIDI keyboard of some kind. You're going to need some way of getting your ideas into the computer, into a DAW. And there's three things that you're going to look at when you're going for a MIDI keyboard. First of all, it's the size, and that is the number of keys, whether we go from 88 keys, which is full-sized, the same number of keys as a grand piano, or 61 or 44 or whatever it is, or a compact one like 25 keys or something like that. That's just 2.5 octaves. When I first started, that was all I had, was a 2.5 octave keyboard. It wasn't before years into my career to break things down, and then later on I traveled to the other side of the world. At some point, you'll probably end up having multiple MIDI controllers, but the first criteria, I think, is the size. The second criteria is going to be the action style, whether it's just kind of really soft and light, or whether you go for the actual weighted key action. If you're a pianist, probably you may want, I should say, the heavy key action to more closely resemble what you're used to playing with at a grand piano. If you're somebody like me who didn't really grow up playing the piano per se, but just uses the keyboard as an implement to realize their ideas, then you're probably going to be fine not getting the hammer action, although it does feel really nice. And then the third thing is going to be the types of faders that you have on there. You're going to need to interact with different modulators in your software, MIDI CCs like Pitchbend and Modwheel and other things like that. So you can get those externally, but it's always useful if you have some amount of those on your main keyboard. So what's the next thing a composer needs if they're going to be writing music for film and games? Well, you need some way to actually listen to and finally mix and master the material that you're working on. And that is going to be in the form of either headphones or monitors. Now, I put interface after that. Obviously, you can't have one without the other, although that's not true. Now I remember why I put headphones or monitors first. Um, if you get to the point where you have everything else and you've got your computer, you've got your sample libraries, you've got your, is that where we are? You've got your MIDI keyboard, and the only thing you have money for left is a pair of headphones, then go for it. In that case, if you're lucky to have something like a MacBook Pro or computer that has a decent sound card built in, you can go for a pair of like Sony 7506s or something with that's really low impedance that's going to perform really well plugging directly into a laptop like that. But in the best case scenario, you also are going to get an audio interface, which I'll talk about in a moment. Now, in terms of whether to get headphones or monitors, there's a few things to think about. The rule of thumb that I have traditionally gone by is that at a budget of under $1,000, you're better off going with headphones, because a pair of headphones that's $1,000 or less is always going to perform better, usually going to perform better than a pair of headphones. Sorry, a pair of monitors under $1,000. Actually, the rule is more like a $500 or less pair of headphones is going to perform better than any monitors that are under $1,000. So the point being, until you're ready to fork out the investment of $1,000 more on monitors, you should stick with headphones. There are some exceptions to that. Now, monitor technology has improved a lot, and companies like Kali Audio have been doing really great things in the sub $1,000 market. Again, you can check them out in my Composer Gear Buyer's Guide or Composer's Gear Guide. But the other things to consider as well are just what are the environments that you're going to be writing music in. If you live alone and you're in a relatively quiet space, you don't have neighbors that you can disturb, then by all means go for monitors if you have the space to do that, and if you can work with monitors often enough without disturbing anybody around you, and if you have the money for treating your room, which is important as well. On the other hand, if you're somebody who moves around a lot, or you have to work in isolation in terms of you need to work around other people, maybe you've got kids or something, or just a roommate or something like that, then headphones can be really flexible. Or if you're like me and you travel a lot, headphones can be really great. When you're looking at headphones, the things that you're going to consider are open back or closed back. In general, open back are always going to be better in terms of their sound reproduction quality. They are much more transparent. I talk about that in my guide as well. And that is going to pay dividends when it comes to mixing, because the frequency response is going to be a lot more neutral and more lifelike. Closed backs are great because they block out more of the environment. And so closed backs are ideal if you're working either in a loud environment, or if you have like roommates or kids or something like that, you need to work late into the night and you don't want to disturb anybody because they're closed and sound isn't going to leak out. If you're looking at monitors, then the things that you need to consider are whether you're going to get 2 or 3-way, the size of your room, and then again, just the budget, right? If you're not willing to pay $1,000 or more on monitors and room treatment, then I would just steer you towards headphones. Now, the last and final piece of gear that you're going to need if you're going to be a film and or game composer is some form of audio interface. Now, it might seem a little bit redundant to talk about audio interfaces because they're so ubiquitous, and if you've been doing any amount of work in music already, you probably already have an audio interface, and there are tons and tons of articles on audio interfaces. But I'm going to tell you what the 3 most important components are going to be, or considerations are going to be when you're looking at an audio interface as a composer? First of all, it's the conversion quality, right? More than the other things, it's the quality of the converters, because that is ultimately what's going to give you your representation of what you're making. So, getting something with really great converters, and I mentioned several recommendations again in my guide. Grace Design, Army, those are among my favorites. Universal Audio, all make excellent converters. And it's not that conversion is something that's exclusively beneficial for composers, but I think that's the first thing I look at. The second thing is the headphone amp quality. Not all headphone amps are built equally, either in terms of their converters or their amplifiers, and having adequate amplification to drive the given headphones that you have is very important, and that's going to have a tremendous effect on the experience you have of listening to your music, and that's going to affect the decisions that you make in critical listening and mixing. And then lastly, I would say IO. And the reason why I say IO last is, and it's actually not last, it's the last of these categories, is that generally speaking, if you're a film or games composer, unless you have lots of instruments or external synths or something like that, you're not going to be recording a whole lot. So getting like a 30 input interface or something like that, that's not really a top priority for people like us, because we're not running these commercial studios where we have to track drum sets and bands. Now, there are some composers that are in that category that have their home studios and they bring instrumentalists over and they need to be able to track things like that. But for the average composer, you just need something with really great converters, a really great headphone amp, and then a limited form of IO. I mean, there are composers that just do everything with sample libraries and never have to actually plug something in. So you don't want to pay extra for IO that you don't need. I would rather steer you towards products that have exceptional headphone amplifiers and converters and are going to give you the most accurate representation of your music than to pay a premium for additional inputs and outputs, which you're not going to use. The last two things to consider with regards to audio interfaces as a composer, and these are the same considerations anybody else has, are connectivity and compatibility. What I mean by that is whether it connects by Thunderbolt or USB or USB-C, and compatibility meaning that it's something that works with your Mac. I have used dozens of, or at least a dozen, I can say, interfaces, probably more than a dozen, and I have some very strong opinions on many of them, and I like and dislike them for many reasons. I love Army because they are forward and backward compatible, meaning if you have a computer that you bought 10 years ago, a new Army interface is going to work with it. If you buy an Army interface now and you buy a computer in 10 years, your Army interface now is still going to work with it. Their dedication to supporting operating systems is far beyond anybody's. Their conversion quality is very good. Their software is very good, and they're cross-platform. So if you switch between Mac and PC, or if you think that there's a chance that you might in the future, they are a great company to buy from because they're going to have you covered in all cases. So that is my little spiel on what gear you need if you're going to pursue composing as a film or games composer. Again, I go into more detail in all of these subjects nearly in my free composer's gear guide, which you can grab at makecinematicmusic.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.